Open talk of this agenda has in itself prompted a response from Moscow. Putin has said this would be considered a serious escalation of the war and that NATO countries will be at war with the country if Ukraine are granted this permission. Well, this comes too as Russia have accused 6 British diplomats of espionage, something the Foreign Office here has dismissed as completely baseless. Let's talk now to Gabriel Gavin, who's a reporter with Politico and author of Russia's Declining Influence. That's the title of his book. And I wonder, Gabriel, if the title of that book, I suppose, answers my first question about how worried we should be about Putin's threats and warnings.
Well, look, Russia's in a particularly difficult situation. The reason that the Ukrainians want the right to be able to use Western weaponry across those borders and strike targets deep inside Russia is because Russia is effectively operating under a kind of shield of immunity. They're able to move troops around, logistics around, run ammunition factories, launch missiles, only because the Ukrainians aren't allowed to hit them. You know, just last week we saw almost 60 people killed in a completely brutal attack on a Ukrainian hospital in Poltava. And the Ukrainians are saying, well, look, we can hit these sites. We can stop Russia from being able to do this kind of thing with impunity. We just need the permission to go ahead and do so. And I think it's become really clear that this is a strategy that Russia depends on because they're trying to effectively, bully Ukraine out of the war and cause so much suffering and harm that, people back down. I think there's no evidence at all that that strategy is going to work. So Russia's kind of trapped in this difficult position where they can't end the war, they can't win the war, and what they're just trying to do is make the war as costly for their opponent as possible. And I think what we've heard from President Biden, certainly what we've heard from European leaders like Keir Starmer, like the Estonian president who was in Kyiv today, is that actually it doesn't make sense to have these kind of restrictions. Biden's hinted that something could change in the coming days, but when Russia receives its missiles from Iran or from North Korea, they don't come with a health warning saying you can only use these inside certain territories. So I think there's a question of kind of fairness that I think particularly the people I've spoken to in Ukraine are really frustrated about.
Well, as you say there, Biden, there have been indications that this is going to happen, that they are going to let Ukraine use these long range missiles. Do you think that that is likely to happen soon?
Well, I think what we've heard from particularly the US and indeed some other European countries like Germany that haven't necessarily been as kind of forward thinking on the war as Britain has, we've heard Zelensky will come out and say something and he'll say, we need ATACMs, or we need more anti-air, or we need these new tanks, or we need fighter jets. And Ukraine's allies will initially say, no, that's kind of a bridge too far for us. And then as the time goes on, it turns into a kind of maybe and then a yes. And I think there's every expectation that this current status quo really won't hold. But I think it's a remarkable sign of Putin's vulnerability that he's had to come out and say, well, no, this really is a red line for us. If you do this, the West will effectively be at war with Russia. And I think it rings really hollowly because he's been saying that since the start of the war. He's been saying that since before the war, that the West is at war with Russia. And I think it's really clear that he's really concerned about the prospect of not just having to try and take more territory in Ukraine, but continue to try and defend Russian soil as well.
But I mean, not just Bradley Bowman, who you've actually written a recent article. He's a senior director of a Centre of Military and Political Power in a hawkish foundation in Washington. He said, as well as it being widely said as a sort of reason not to do this, Russia is a nuclear power. I mean, it's been said at the embassy today in a UN meeting. We can't forget that.
Yeah, and I think nobody should underestimate just how dangerous nuclear weapons, particularly in the hands of a regime like Russia's, are. But I think Putin's problem is that he kind of played his trump card too early. He kind of, even we're talking 2 years ago nearly, he was saying, we have nuclear weapons, let us do what we want or we'll use them.
Yeah.
And, that hasn't happened. But it's very clear that, the threat of using nuclear weapons is far greater, it's far more profound than the risk of actually them being used. I think the use of nuclear weapons, at least kind of strategic, big level nuclear missiles, is a death sentence to absolutely everybody. First and foremost, Vladimir Putin. And I think if there's one thing Putin cares about, it's the survival of himself, his inner circle, and his regime. And I don't think he wants to be a kind of, prince among the rubble. I don't think that's a situation that anyone's countenancing. And I think it's really unclear from some of the NATO experts I've spoken to in the past couple of years that it's entirely possible that if he gave that order, it wouldn't be carried out, and it might be the last one he ever gave. The question is whether Russia might use tactical nuclear warheads on the battlefield, and I think that's a really challenging one. But again, it's an escalation that nobody knows what would happen if that took place, and I think it's a gamble that I think would ultimately, inevitably, not pay off for Putin.
Fascinating. I feel we find ourselves so often in this place trying to gauge what Putin is thinking, and it's incredibly difficult. Everybody knows to do so, but thank you for people like you. We get some sort of an insight, or as close as we can. That's Gabriel Gavin there, reporter with Politico and author of the book Russia's Declining Influence, which is going to be out soon. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.